There's been so much to digest. One theme that seems to be running through is AI anxiety and smartphone anxiety. And I just want to bring up with what we're seeing with Qualcomm and ARM today and a worry about smartphones flatlining and what that means for some of these chip providers. What do you make of it, Ayako? I know you don't hold Qualcomm or ARM, but what would you make about the read across?
Sure. So, hi, Caroline. In terms of the overall AI environment, I think we're focused on both the short term and the long term, right? In the short term, for companies like Qualcomm, they're really impacted by the handset slowdown. However, I think if you look out longer term, and where they're going to play is really in that, inference side, or, where the chips will be able to be in smaller devices, as the ARM CEO talked about, and things like new form factors with like Meta's Ray-Ban glasses. These are going to be where Qualcomm might have additional exposure to, which would be a positive for Qualcomm.
It's interesting. The best points contributor on the day is NVIDIA, and there's a note out of JP Morgan saying actually, like these DeepSeek moves, this less compute necessary is actually going to win out for them from an inference perspective. So where have you come out on this whole divide as to whether companies should be spending a lot on AI infrastructure?
So I think the arms race is on, and that most companies are going to spend in order to make sure that they have all the primary models set, all the frontier models that ARM talked about. And then it's going to be how best to access, all the efficiencies that DeepSeek brought are going to be, explored by many companies. And so I think there's a lot of ways to play AI. And, we're still trying to figure out what the landscape is really going to look like. And it's accelerating. It's just moving so quickly. Every month there's something new.
On the cloud computing front, we've already seen some mixed numbers coming from the hyperscalers, Alphabet, Microsoft. What are you expecting when Amazon reports later today?
Sure. So I think everybody's focused again on what the CapEx guide might be, any sort of color commentary on CapEx. Everybody's looking at that CapEx trajectory to see, is everybody getting that return on that spend? But, I think the demand for cloud computing continues to increase. And so it makes sense from a long-term perspective for many of these hyperscalers to continue to spend on increasing capacity in the cloud.
Speaking of demand, one of the things that always surprised me about Alphabet's cloud unit is that it had a good chunk of business coming from smaller, more nimble AI startups. And with some of the numbers that it put out, I'm curious if you are thinking if that kind of demand, if that vector of growth has kind of run its course.
I don't think so. I think AI is still so relatively new that I think there's going to be new innovative players that are going to want to access that AI platform through Google or through Microsoft or AWS. I think, there's going to be different companies that explore different platforms just to see what's best for them.
What's so interesting is Amazon has been making its own chips. And so too, Alphabet actually, even though its shares fell on its earnings, Broadcom soared because of the CapEx spending and what it means for chip makers for some of these cloud computing companies. What do you make of how they're getting into the vertically AI focus?
In terms of the overall spend, I think, it's just going to continue, that spend going to a lot of these, chip makers. So whether it's NVIDIA or Broadcom, eventually it will come to Qualcomm as well. But I think it's going to continue. There's so many ways to access AI and build it out. I think it's going to continue to develop over the long term.
The thing that everyone's trying to wrestle with is the valuations. Though, with all this optimism, ARM trades at 100 times future earnings. Maybe that's why it pulls back from the day on what the market says is slightly muted forecasts. What do you make of the valuation levels since the sell-off from DeepSeek on NVIDIA, for example?
Well, and I think that's why Qualcomm's valuation is pretty interesting here. It's still in the, mid-teens, low double digits. And, I think that if you look out far enough, you'll see that there's potentially, a lot more growth coming for Qualcomm in the future. However, you have to look at the valuations both in the near term. NVIDIA does trade at high valuations as well. But again, if the build out continues, if you're really going to need to continue to spend so much, both, Broadcom and NVIDIA, probably, the earnings are going to grow and catch up with the multiple.